So I'd like to give the floor to Professor Andre Havish to talk to us about practical wisdom and its plurality.
Excellent. So I don't want to start without expressing my gratitude to Dean Bafayagara for already years-long lasting partnership and initiative to build trust and friendship among our institutions, and also a special gratitude to our students here who participated in our project in different ways by dedicating their MA thesis to different topics of practical wisdom in management. And today we really had a very, very inspiring plurality of perspectives from different topics, be it especially our colleagues Abdelrahman Hassi from the business school, Akhawayn Business School, different topics of human resource management, or Professor Benjaloun, who is also contributed very, very inspiring master theses on different aspects of finance management. So we have really a broad array of topics, and what became obvious that it's a very, very inspiring research project. But let me shortly give a short overview on the background of our project. And of course, it's not just an isolated discussion which we have here, but it's positioned in the current tendency which within the Academy of Management, a large international community of business management researchers. And those of you who regularly visit their international annual conferences in the US know about recent topics. So the last annual conference in Orlando, for example, was entitled Beyond Capitalism, of doing business, and something I think which in a totally new way also puts public attention on those aspects which we are here in different forms researching. So our interest is questioning beyond rules and incentives in corporate governance, overcoming sometimes very technical principal-agent models and what I would call the Pavlov dog mechanism. Yeah? So how can I incentivize my employees? How can I kind of create a structure in which they are kind of forced or led to do what I, as a shareholder, want them to do, and to come up with more intrinsic concepts of management and leadership, and sense-giving and opening up horizons of responsible business in society. And another methodological aspect is that we want to also go beyond mere mathematical models in social engineering in management and education. Of course, we do not neglect the necessity of a very sound methodological and technical education. We all know that this is an important aspect of management education. Our only point is that this is not the whole story. Yeah, but if we talk to business leaders and if we talk to small and medium entrepreneurs, we know that value-based management plays a very important role too. And our only pledge is that this value-based management is not in no way represented or very poorly represented in the schedules and programs of our business schools. Yeah, so therefore we want not to abolish but to complement and enrich the educational programs of our business schools. So, probably let's skip this. Talking about spiritual traditions, what do you mean by spiritual tradition? And of course, I myself, as has been said, studied theological ethics, but also economics. I'm also a master in economics. So our main interest here in this program is not religion as such. Yeah? So we are not teaching in the religious studies department, But what is our special interest is the value-based culture, which is developed by practitioners in the context of these religious and spiritual traditions. So all major spiritual traditions developed these traditions of practical wisdom. It has been lay people, yeah, people in business, in law, in administration, who kind of inspired by these religious traditions came up with a decision practice, with a way of deliberation, with a way of deciding on conflictual issues, which reflect these practical wisdom. And so it's not theologians, but lay people and responsible in society who are the main actors. And of course, entrepreneurs have always played a very important role in this context. And I personally was very intrigued when I understood that even the Prophet Muhammad, yeah, was married to a businesswoman. Yeah? And so we see here, at the very heart of the Islam tradition, the role business has always played, even in the development of a concept of man, of a concept of the world, and inspiring the responsibility of future generations. So framing living conditions and socioeconomic developments is also very tangible results of this practical wisdom tradition. My personal background is, of course, the principles of Christian social thought in the 19th century, in which we know the situation in Europe was pretty much probably comparable to many countries in the southern hemisphere today. So we saw mean working time in 1872 was 72 hours. Yeah, we didn't have a social assistance, and we had to strive to frame emergent business structures, and we had child labor and exploitation, of course. And it was in this very context in which faithful entrepreneurs, who even in this totally new context of industrialization wanted to stick to their value tradition. Yeah? They overcome this widespread misery, first of all on the personal level by showing responsibility for their workers, introducing many institutions which later became also part of the modern welfare state. Yeah, so this is not so much known, but practical wisdom from spiritual traditions played a very important role in developing basic institutions of Western society. Today is forgotten, nobody remembers these people anymore, but we still profit from the institutions which have been built in this spirit. Okay, let's take this. What I want to highlight here also in introduction to the other presentations which we will have is a plurality of, so I have the same problem, plurality of topics of practical wisdom. So it's not, I think it's crossing different disciplines of management, and some topics which we had here today and discussed here today is, for example, practical wisdom and diversity management, practical wisdom and human resource management, sustainable tourism, marketing, finance. So it's not its own discipline, but it's kind of crossing different disciplines, and that's why we are very grateful that we have also a variety of scholars also from other countries and traditions here with us. And I might mention that we have also scholars from Tunisia, from Egypt, and unfortunately also a colleague from Lebanon was announced to participate. For personal reasons she couldn't make it, but she is also a constant member of our international team. So we see also the possibility and the chance to bring together scholars from very different cultural settings to better understand also the variety of forms of practical wisdom practice in different countries. And we even saw it today, like for example, the zakat practice is very different in Morocco or in Egypt or in Lebanon. So this plurality of practices can also enlighten our research project. So our main goal, and I would also like to invite you to probably consider promote this a little bit inside of the different lectures in the university, is to recruit German and Arab students who are willing to choose wise decision making and value-based management in business practice as a point of departure for their thesis. We have shown, I think, that this can cover very diverse topics and research disciplines, but brings us together on a common elements of working together. And one aspect is what we currently do is we organize intercultural excursions with students and professors. So talking about and thinking about practical wisdom should also include the direct contact with practically wise business leaders. Yeah, so we really want to bring our students together with responsible people from the different countries. We organized already last year one excursion of German students in Morocco and an excursion of Moroccan students in Germany. Some of you could also participate in that. And I think it was a very valuable chance to exchange ideas, to learn about the cultural background of the other countries, and also to get private and direct contact with people from other parts.
There's a country institutional profile that is based on the research of Kostava. And Kostava specifies relevant antecedents of managers' gender role attitude. And he pointed out that 3 components are relevant for country institutional profiles. The first component is a cognitive component, that is a shared knowledge in society. The second is a normative component, that are the values and norms. And the third is the regulatory component, that are the laws and the rules. And the assumption in this profile is that all of these 3 components influence the manager's role attitude. And in addition to this, that is a national context that provides significant guidance for managers handling daily events in their organizations. So I would to go more deeper in these 3 components. Concerning the cognitive context, we have two elements. The first is the education, the second is the religiosity. Education means that the influence of the educational system, for example, with greater access, success, and societal signification, fosters the development of modern world values. So we will hope that there will be more gender role equality. The other aspect is the religiosity, or the degree of religiosity. That means that countries with higher levels of religiosity are more likely to have individuals exposed to views promoting traditional gender roles. There is the uncertainty avoidance. That means the degree to which societal members perceive ambiguous and uncertain situations as threatening. So in a society with high uncertainty avoidance, people prefer order, orderliness, and they prefer structure. And they prefer clear gender role and even the traditional gender role. Now the other point is the power distance. That means the degree to which members of a society accept power to be distributed hierarchically. That means in societies with high power distance, people accept inequalities. Then we have another cultural dimension that is called masculinity. Masculinity stands for societies with very clearly and distinct gender role expectations. We then find a differentiation in gender, egalitarianism, and assertiveness. And assertiveness means a masculinity dimension that refers to the degree to which individuals in a society are confrontational and aggressive in social relationship. And the difficult word, gender egalitarianism, it's like religiosity or something like this, means the degree to which the society minimizes gender role differences by promoting gender equality. And the last point is the regulatory context. That means regulation and legislation that is aimed at redressing gender equality. And the less likely such societies, so as research, are to be sex segregation regimes, and the less likely is that managers will have these traditional gender roles. So, to the results from these studies. A lot of researchers found that all of the three components of the country institutional profile have an effect and influence managers' traditional gender role attitudes. The first result, according to the cognitive context, society with more product and successful educational systems have really more egalitarian gender attitudes. But it was very interesting that religiosity at the national level isn't related to managers' traditional gender role attitudes. That may be that even religiosity is a more individual experience, or that in modern society the influence of religiosity diminished, for example. Or how can educational context reverse the general effects of education in promoting a more modern view of gender roles? Or what relationship exists between gender role attitudes and specific religion, like the Christianity or the Islam, in terms of their distribution and influence in nation? Or, for example, a last question for me is, to what extent does legislation in a very longitudinal manner determine whether and how this encourages less traditional gender role attitudes over time? There are some suggestions for further research from my side.
At the very beginning, of course, we have to ask ourselves, why is diversity becoming more and more the most important ones? And as a geographer and historian, I would say maybe the most important one is the shrinking of time and space, which we subscribe with the term globalization. Traveling back into history, we know that the main push factor why companies implemented diversity management was not really intrinsic, it was the legislation policy. Yeah? Just think of the affirmative action programs or the legislation policy in Brussels, but also in our societies, particularly in Western societies, the demographic change. From a business perspective, there are, of course, much more arguments, much more push factors, but some of them, which I find most important, is the cost argument, it's the creativity argument, it's a marketing argument, particularly if you want to attract new customers, but also new employees, and of course the topics which are very important in the context of our project, corporate social responsibility and practical wisdom. Well, to put it in a nutshell, what is constitutive of diversity? And there are 4 layers according to Gardenwatz and Rohre. And the most important one, that's you, that's me, that are we, that is our personality. and our personality consists out of many dimensions. Yeah? And the first layer of the personality are the internal dimensions. For example, age, race, ethnicity. But there are also external dimensions, like geographic location, like parental status, like work experience, and of course, from a business perspective, the organizational dimensions. Okay, one citation I want to present to you is from Dess and Parker, who stated, consequently, an increasingly diverse workforce is variously viewed as opportunity, threat, problem, threat, or even, and I would say that is the most challenging one, non-issue. These disparate views lead people to manage workforce diversity in distinct ways, resulting in different costs and benefits. Despite the claim by some that there is one best way to manage a diverse workforce, there is little agreement on what it is. Yet, as several writers have observed, diversity can be viewed through lenses other than legal or ethical, and diversity has been defined, studied, and approached in quite different ways. In this context, I want to show you which perspectives there are. The first, and maybe the worst perspective, is the resistance perspective. Yeah? With the problem statement, diversity, as also mentioned in the citation, is not an issue at all, or even it's a threat. Yeah? So the desired outcome is protect the status we have in our organization, and the strategic response we could describe as reactive. Then the second one is a discrimination and fairness perspective. This is the oldest perspective. It is linked mainly to legislation, to the affirmative action programs, for example, or to the legislation policy of Brussels. And the problem statement is differences cause problems. And the strategic response would be defensive. The third perspective is the access and legitimacy perspective. The problem statement is differences create opportunities. So it's a quite open-minded perspective towards diversity. The desired outcome is access to employees, I mentioned that aspect, but also to consumers. Taking into consideration that competition in a globalized world is increasing, and the strategic response would be accommodative. And to my mind, the most valuable, most precious perspective is the learning perspective. We talked about learning organizations. Is the problem statement differences and similarities. We're not only talking about differences, but also about certain similarities, and particularly, and the second company I will introduce to you is more or less also a Bavarian enterprise, because the town where it is located used to be part of Bavaria from the 16th to the 18th century. And now I hope that the film is working.
first thing I want to show you a film as well. I want to start with these videos that they have on flight, you know, because you're here for a long time. Having this video, not to move your neck and stuff like that, and your feet, so that you actually, but that took too much time, so I have to cut that. Okay, so first slides, obviously, I'm going to talk about practical wisdom for sustainable management and the link to sustainable tourism. And this slide is actually from Malaysia. Okay, it's from Kuala Lumpur, and it refers to we want to protect our environment. And to do that, we have to use sustainable tourism or sustainability as well as practical wisdom. And I will refer to that during my presentation. First, I want to thank the people who actually organized this. So Mona, where's Claudius, taking pictures, and Andrea, thank you very much for organizing this. I took this secretly. You know, the pictures are like... And something else, you know, we stay at the Education Center of Excellence, or the accommodation here on campus. That's actually on the board there. Okay, they have it tied up there. Wisdom is not a product of schooling, but of the lifelong attempt to acquire it. Okay, a very good quote which fits very well of what we are doing, and it's everywhere. You know, this is here. So that's what I'm going to talk about a bit. Now, jump that one. I'm starting with talking about what is sustainability. Now, we talk a lot about it, and it's obviously my field of expertise. So first, sustainability was first defined by supposedly the Brundtland Commission, which was a report by the United Nations, which was published in 1987. It says sustainability is a sustainable development. Development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So clearly, sustainability is directed towards the future as well as towards the present. Normally, people use a three-pillar model. Okay, and this is the normal three-pillar model that you use. Sustainable development should bring economic prosperity, environmental protection, and social justice. So everyone should benefit in the same way. Now, I changed that, and I thank you for providing a house for us here at the university. So this is just an imagination of your house, and I use it again, because I changed the actual, you know, what is sustainability? I would say it's a two-pillar model, which has as a foundation of whatever we do is nature. Everything we create, every income that comes from nature. So we have that as the actual basis. Then we have social, cultural, and economic, you know, sustainability, obviously both important, but they are framed, all of them, by politics, which is often left out. So politics frames what we're actually doing with regards to sustainability. Now moving on to tourism. Normally I ask my students, what's tourism? I get around, if there are 50 students, 50 different opinions. You know what is tourism? So there is no definition, but quite clearly what it means, people either travel within their country or they move across borderlines, which means they come into contact with other people, with diversity. You know, there is a high diversity in international tourism, which I will refer to in the following. So, you know, you don't travel for more than one consecutive year for particular reasons, and you're not paid. So you're not getting any money for what you're actually doing. You just enjoy it. Okay, so sustainable tourism. Now move on and try to connect tourism with sustainability. Is tourism that takes full account of its current and future economic, social and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment and host communities. So personally, for me, the most important one of this definition is the host community. You know, we are talking about that a lot, and you know, Westerners travel in the majority. How many people do you think traveled last year internationally? What do you think? What is the tourism number? International tourism arrivals, 2013. Any clue? Give me an idea, it doesn't have to be right. What do you think?
Like worldwide.
Sorry?
Worldwide. Everything else.
Yeah, worldwide, yeah.
400 million.
How many?
400 million.
Yeah. Other people? More or less? More. Okay, 1.1 billion. Okay, last year we had 1.1 billion international tourist arrivals. More than 50% of them are Europeans. Okay, more than 50% of these international travelers are Europeans, which already gives you an idea about the imbalance that we currently have in tourism. Now, sustainable tourism obviously tries to optimize the use of environmental resources. Remember the pillars. The most important thing is what we do with our environment. And that for a place like Morocco will become vitally important in the future. You look at your sustainability document for tourism that you have, and the Vision 2030, I think it is, which doesn't include anything on sustainability. So there is a discrepancy there,
yes.
which you actually have to address somewhere, because you live off these resources. People come to see your forests, to see your beaches. If they're wasted, they won't come anymore. Okay? So that's consider that. So tourism should provide long-term benefits. Important is the distribution of these benefits, because that is a particular issue in sustainability. They are unfairly distributed, not just the tourists, also the benefits. Okay? So again, that's important as well. And it is a value-based approach where we come back to actually practical wisdom, which is based on values. What values do we actually have, and which we actually want to live as a tourist as well as a tourist provider. Now, as I said, I make it quite quickly. So, determine desirable tourism results through local wisdom is at the core of the link between the different elements: sustainability, tourism, practical wisdom. So we have to try to incorporate what local people know. An example of that, for example, is in many countries around the world, tourists want particular plants around their houses. These plants are often exotic plants. They use more water, they use more fertilizer, these kind of things. If you use local wisdom, you may use local plants. They use often less water, are adjusted to the local condition, and therefore they are more beneficial for the tour operators as well as for the local environment. So these kind of things. We need to determine ways to achieve this. Again, you could say, we could, as possible topics, how do we include practical wisdom in how we run businesses in Morocco and tourism? Do we have maybe investment structures that change? Should we think about investment structures 50-50? Maximum 50% foreign investment, that at least not all the money leaks out of your economy. These kind of things. And most important is, how do you apply sustainable tourism in Morocco? Because it's a Western concept. It's a Western Christian concept, which, people take and just think everyone else in the world should do it like that. But that's not necessarily the way it should be done. Okay? You should incorporate the practical knowledge that is available in Morocco or in Egypt or in Tunisia to actually, develop your own form of sustainable tourism. Because you will know much better what's good for your country than people from the outside coming in. So it is about cooperation, and it is about working with each other, and all of us could benefit.
I'd like to open the floor for questions. Please, anybody wants to start? We had some interesting topics, plurality and practical wisdom, gender studies, practical wisdom, sustainable tourism, practical wisdom, and diversity. So, questions, please.
Too late for questions, or are you all too shy? Look, last time, I never killed anyone, but when someone asks a question, so please ask a question.
Dr. Lemire?
I just raised the following question: what's wisdom? Are we talking maybe about, because you talk about spirituality, the religion, values, ethics. So all these concepts show some part of wisdom, but is there a definition that we can all agree on?
Yeah, in the Western tradition, it stems from the Greek concept of phronesis, from Aristotle, and Aristotle was aware of the fact that that in reality we don't have just one way of implementing values, but we have always value conflicts. For example, we have value conflict between maybe sometimes efficiency on the one hand and equality or justice on the other hand. And the concept of Aristotle of this practical wisdom was that you have to kind of find your way. You have to equilibrate these differences and find the right way. And this is pretty much taking into consideration different conditions, practical condition of situational conditions. So what introducing practical wisdom means, not believe in your models.
First, the concept of wisdom in general is defined as not through hard work, not through only studying, but it's a privilege from God in the Islamic perspective. Our project is about practical wisdom, which, as Professor Omri mentioned, it's phronesis, right, in the Greek philosophy. It's going beyond formalized models and procedures in making decisions. It's about judgment. And as we discussed this morning, even Immanuel Kant, who provided philosophy and methodology with one of the most formalized procedures, which is the, as we discussed this morning, the categorical imperative, placed the emphasis on judgment. Why? Because there is a fundamental difference between what is good and what is right. We can make a good decision for us as an organization, for us as stakeholders, but that might not be necessarily good for others or right for others. It could maximize our benefits, but would minimize others, right? It would be a competitive advantage for us, but an inferioritative advantage for others. Hence the importance of practical wisdom in adopting a holistic perspective. But now, what are the sources of practical wisdom? So, as Professor Amir mentioned, there is religion. So you implied that religion, spirituality, yes, of course. Religion, of course, it's submitting to or accepting a transcendent power. In general. So when people accept and submit their faith, their destiny to God, whereas spirituality, as it has been historically defined in the Jewish tradition as roh, in Arabic roh, right? And also in the Latin pneuma, the spirit. I think all the religions have maybe the same definition, almost the same concept. Now, there has been, I don't see any major difference between spirituality and religion. I think the recent development or the recent debate that we have been fabricated, and they are political and politically motivated and charged. It's because of the new movement that has taken place in the last 30-40 years in efforts to replace the so-called structured religions. It's a reaction to Christianity, to Islam, and to Judaism. So ultimately, religion, spirituality, all tradition, those all are sources of practical wisdom, which is, again, going beyond established models, beyond established techniques, using judgment. And there's something important to practical wisdom. It's about the situation. It's situational. It's about circumstances. We might have the same variables, if you use this positivistic terminology, to make decisions, but the decision would always be different. It's always based on the situation, always based on circumstances.
Thank you, Professor Hassi. Question? Yes, please.
Just a clarification. You showed us two examples of two German companies that adopted practical wisdom as a transcendent concept, and actually they apply it in their day-to-day activities. But what we see is that other companies worldwide in the US and other fast-growing markets, companies try to have sustainable management plans, long-term planning for taking into account the environment. But we don't see, from an external perspective, if we think outside of the box, we don't see that practical management or practical wisdom is being implemented to customers. It's an internal thing that companies have. Why not exteriorizing and showing that facet so that people can maybe get exposed to this concept and then interact with those companies in a positive way? Because you said in the beginning that this concept is beyond capitalism, and maybe the economic downturn now contributes more or takes advantage of this situation. But practical wisdom is here to have development which is on the long term to avoid actually such drawbacks of the capitalist system. So what is in your opinion, a good way to expand this vision and to make it more apparent, and so that more companies can worldwide know about this concept? Because frankly, I never heard this term. The first time I was exposed to that, and it's actually interesting. It's beyond the methodology, the different total quality management, different quality issues. You have certifications that companies get here in Morocco, for instance. Certifications are the number one argument to give to people as far as quality is concerned. So this is another factor that we have in the equation, and it would be great, to know how to promote that kind of methodology.
First of all, thank you very much indeed for your highly interesting question. I would say that the concept of practical wisdom is not limited to companies. But of course, if companies, and I'm not convinced whether you can implement it. I think it's more a way of practicing, of living, of thinking, and if you live the practical wisdom way and your employees observe it or live it and communicate it within their families or outside the company, I think that is the best advertisement you can have for the concept. Actually, of course we have to admit the ideas, the philosophical and theological ideas of practical wisdom are very old, yeah? But the scientific occupation with the topic is rather new. And I would claim and pledge that we as researchers should not only publish within these journals which are linked mainly to the scientific community. We have to transport our results more in well, maybe to modern media like social media, and to integrate as many people as possible. Yeah, that's my impression. Maybe you would say something.
And I'm very happy about your focus on certificates. Yeah, we were actually also discussing this today during our session, and what we see here is kind of external structures or elements which try to induce morality in a different way, or ethical behavior in a different way. We have even all these reporting standards, GRI. Yeah, we have a lot of elements now which trying to fill that gap, I would say, which has been. It's fine. Yeah, we have the 10 principles of the Global Compact. Yeah, and all these CSR thing. Yeah, it's fine. It's maybe useful, but it also detracts from my perspective, because what we also want to achieve with this program is to bring ethics back, yeah, to the people. Yeah, and the people many times also live from their moral, ethical, religious traditions. Yeah, and we find many of these aspects we were discussing about bio and halal, for example, today. Yeah, we find many of these things. Or we discussed about Islamic insurance, and whether there are some elements which we know from social responsible investment today that people are willing to have, of course, a deal. Yeah, but at the same time they also want to do something good, and they do it in one. Yeah, economic action. Yeah, they want to be two parts of it. So we see many of these things return. Yeah, and I think it's very important to, especially to not only academically trained people, yeah, but from their behaviors and choices will also depend whether companies will be successful in the markets in promoting these topics. Yeah, to bring this back to their minds and discover it into the religious, in the religious traditions. And we know that for centuries, I mean, we speak of corporate social responsibility probably for 10 years or for 50 years. Before we have spoken in the religious context about successful solutions, or the good solution, or the sustainable solutions. Yeah, so this was for centuries and for whole generations, this was the place where these kind of fulfilled and ethical practice was mentioned. Yeah. So I think we want to bring this together and include as many aspects as possible.
Yes. Well, yeah, just go ahead, Laura.
So I was just thinking about an example of what you said in corporate business, because for example now companies like Walmart, they have also to check where their supplies come from and if the products, either it's child labor or if people have inhuman conditions. So you could see that in the supply chain. So this is part of also, let's say, an expansion of this practical wisdom approach.
But it's different from practical wisdom. It's a kind of practical. It's just sustainability management. They're trying just to be sustainable. But practical wisdom is actually beyond this point. Companies are starting actually doing this, but practical wisdom is not something that you can do trainings for. You can't bring people and have a training about practical wisdom. It's about values. It's beyond the process. And this was not done.
Yes, but business is also done by people.
Yeah.
So if you see it in that context, then you can use this as an expansion, of course, and it's more work to be done.
This in form of films from companies, and that some of the entrepreneurs speaks and says, that is my wish and that are my values and my norms, for example. But I really think that you have a concept which takes both a qualitative and a quantitative approach.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe a very short answer. Some organizations, and the best example is the Canadian federal government, and I think Professor Lamary can confirm that as well. They have one specific test. It's called situational judgment. There are multiple tests, set of tests. There are tests that evaluate and assess competencies, others that competence skills, personality, and so forth. But there is one just for judgment, and it's really called situational judgments. It's a set of ethic-based situations that we need to test. So this could be a good tool, but this would only assess principles, theory, if you want it. What we call as should be, what things should be. Now, in my view, to assess behaviors of people, we should maybe look at specific examples from the past. I do believe in recruiting that the best indicator of future performance is past performance. So we can ask, candidate about specific situations, how they dealt with them, a case of, unorthodox practices, corruption, bribery, illegal stuff, all kinds of things like that. Maybe specific examples, but there is a formal test, situational judgment, and maybe you can share some information, by email or later about the other. I have some specific questions on that test.
Thank you.
Can I say
One
something?
last. I'd hate to be the police, time police here, but yeah.
Because I think it's the same challenge that the notion of workplace spirituality faces.
Yes.
And then they have found out while they were using the let's say the traditional qualitative and quantitative approach,
Yes.
that actually they lost even the sense of the idea of spirituality. So what they have done now, they have created sort of integrative theories and the new also quantitative methods, but I don't remember the names, like ethnostatistics. There are scholars who do these things. So it's a different approach, which is more integrative and which tries to capture this, which is so difficult to capture, the value and the spirituality.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Andre, Professor Martina, Professor Dirk, Professor Nikolai for your presentation, and thank you for the audience for your input, and Professor Hesse for your input also. Thank you for being here, and have a nice evening. And I hope that you're becoming more wise.